Okay, hi guys. This is going to be quite a complex video. We're going to look at a lot of different elements and tie them together, but you'll be interested in it from a couple of perspectives. First of all, we have the astrology, and what led me to this discovery was, remember I said that the important thing about Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions is that although they reoccur every 20 years, they keep reoccurring in the same element. But what was important about the last one is we shifted from Earth into air. So I wanted to look back into history to see when last we shifted into air for significant events. The date I came up with was around 1180, but that wasn't into Aquarius. The first time it was into Aquarius in terms of being in air was around 1285, so we're looking at that date. And I happened to look back to a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Capricorn, which is also kind of significant. So all these today are going to tie into Middle East prophecy, Middle East predictions, right? End times prophecy. Remember I said that it's highly likely that Revelations is another Operation Trust or QAnon trap for people to fall into. I have more evidence now to back that up. And so it's Middle East prophecy. There's a little bit of Trump in here as well. And kind of a little indication that if the forces that we are led to believe in this article, which is by Whitney, Webb, are so powerful, they could want to steer him into office. Because for those of you who read the Trumpet magazine, which I think is well, I don't think, it's a kind of Christian religious on the side of Protestant kind of evangelical side of Christianity publication that goes out every month. They're really good on geopolitics. They've always had an excellent amount of articles on rock solid things that are happening, particularly with the growth of China and the growth of influence of China. They have said that they've been predicting things like World War II, the European Union, the breakaway of England from the European Union, and they claim they predicted Trump would win. They were absolutely dead certain that he would win in 2020 because they say he's key to end times prophecy. Remember, I predicted that Trump would be the last president, and I said because of the position of the nodes in his chart, he's pivotal to world events. So does that mean that in some form he will come back in order to fulfill what a lot of people believe is end time prophecy, and maybe that belief can even propel it to happen? I mean, these are questions that we want to ask from an astrological point of view and for a geopolitical point of view. Okay, now the very first chart that I've got up here is a chart for, I don't know if that's the right one. Let's see here. Seems to have gone, here we go. Okay, there you go. So this very first chart is for the year 780. So we're going back quite a long way. What's significant is you can see here that Saturn is in Sagittarius. It's not too far from entering Capricorn, where it will form a conjunction with Pluto. So that means the following year we would have had a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, one of only a handful that have happened in the last 2 millennia, right? We know that one happened at the time of Martin Luther. There's another that happened in 1285, a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, and here you see this one is happening. So therefore it's important. I've set it for Jerusalem because it's also the year that the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built. Now, earthquakes used to be quite frequent in that area, so there had been Al-Aqsa mosques on that spot in the previous sort of decades, which had been destroyed by earthquake. This was a new one. You can see that's pictures from Wikipedia, and this little blurb here is from Wikipedia. It talks about the other mosques being damaged there was one built in 746, 753, another reconstruction started in 771, but it was in 780 when Muhammad al-Mahdi had it rebuilt, but the length was curtailed and its breadth was increased. So that was a significant year for the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and I believe that one stayed standing quite a long time, although there was another earthquake. Now, a lot of people say an earthquake for that region is quite overdue. I would guess that if there was a major earthquake, whether it was manipulated, because apparently they are building loads of tunnels underneath for the purpose of archaeology, but a lot of people say that it's in order to make the structure more stable, that it will crumble. So, whichever way you want to look at it, right? But there is a lot of talk about the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque being key to the end times prophecy. And if you remember, not so long ago in Iran, there was a leader called Ahmadinejad, and he was part of a Muslim sector who believe also in end times prophecy and that we should always kind of bring it on. And funnily enough, there are people in the Jewish religion who are very aware of the role of Israel. They say the first part of end times prophecy was fulfilled in 1948 when Israel became a state. The second part of end times prophecy was fulfilled in 1967, I think it was the Six-Day War. And they say the third part will be fulfilled when Solomon's temple was rebuilt on that spot. Now, you'll know before that Solomon's temple was key. Initially it was a Solomon's temple there, and then was destroyed, another one was built. But right now, since 780, that area has basically been under the control of the Muslims, and therefore there has stood the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, just to mention quickly, the Crusades were mainly fought with maybe French, British money in order to reclaim the Holy Land, reclaim that particular spot of land, and to rebuild Solomon's temple. Hasn't happened. Now, I mention the Crusades because they're going to come up when we look at dates astrologically. So key to end times prophecy is that that mosque is destroyed and Solomon's temple is rebuilt. Certain sectors of American Christians or evangelicals, and in the UK and America, subscribe to that belief as well. Mike Pence notably, and also Mike Pompeo. We're going to look into that a little bit more. So when we're talking about astrology, revelations, are we at a key phase? Well, we could be, but not necessarily because it's inevitable from a religious point of view, but because some religious sects are almost pushing for it and egging it on and wanting it to happen. And that would, as I say, be people from all three of the monotheistic religions, right? I would just like to introduce this particular chart. This is from 1285 in the Gregorian calendar. You can see it's significant because of all the planets here in Capricorn. I'm not so worried about the ascendant, but very similar to what we had last year. You have this huge stellium of planets in Capricorn. You can see that there's also a Saturn-Pluto conjunction at this very time. Mars is there, other planets there. The North Node is in Capricorn, whereas last year the North Node this time was in Cancer, but even the nodal position, although flipped, is similar. So 1285 is significant because it was the end of the period of the Crusades. And from that period on, while there was, I think, the period of a Reconquista in Spain, the Muslim forces retained control of that particular land, and it stayed that way until Israel was given sovereignty in 1948. So from the point of view of that being the kind of tailing off period of the Crusades, I think it's important. Why that chart is also important is that's the first time there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. Not the first time ever, but the first time is that set, particular set where it was going back into air. So it's important, this chart, from the point of view of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius and the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn. Therefore, we're looking back at that and looking for similarities. So I'm saying that I'm wondering if, I think the destruction of Israel has been talked about by Henry Kissinger, who actually said, this was about 7 years ago, that Israel will cease to exist within 10 years. Now, I'm looking at this chart and thinking that that was the time when the Crusades were over and when the Muslim empires cemented control in that area, and it stayed like that virtually until 1948. So I'm wondering if we will see the destruction of Israel, but it could be something that's egged on by the three different religions to fulfill end times prophecy as well. Now, I would just like to talk briefly about 1180, an important year because the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, as you've seen I've written there, started in air again. I think it was actually Libra, not Aquarius, but it started again in air. And you can see that this was a time of significant defeats for the Crusaders and the Knights Templar. Saladin, who defeated the Crusader army of 20,000 men under Guy of Lusignan at the Horns of Hatton, the Battle of Hatton, very important that thing that happened that year. Guy was captured, I assume he's French, captured along with many nobles, knights, among them Reynold of Chatillon, I think a lot of this push for the Crusades was coming out of France. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And the latter, Raymond of Chatillon, was executed by Saladin himself. So the Crusader states had no reserves left to defend the castles and fortified settlements, and Saladin was victorious. Also talks about Conrad of Montferrat, an Italian nobleman who arrived in Tyre, which I think is where kind of Lebanon is these days, and he ends the surrender negotiations with Saladin, and the remnants of the Crusader army swear loyalty to him. Okay, it goes on there about Saladin's campaign that paves the way for Muslim inroads into Christian territory. And there's Palestine is invaded by the Egyptian army, who captured the strategic castle of Mirabel. In the September of this year, Saladin has captured the cities of Acre, Jaffa, Gaza, Ascalon, and along with 50 other Crusader castles. There is the siege of Jerusalem. Saladin captures Jerusalem after the Crusaders, led by a battalion of Iberim, have surrendered the holy city, and the takeover of the city is peaceful. So takeaway point from all that is it's the recapturing of that area by Saladin and the Muslim forces. Okay guys, so what I've been trying to look at here is to draw some astrological references, and then we're going to go through this article now by Whitney Webb. Now Whitney Webb is kind of verbose. These articles are kind of long. I've done my best to distill it down. I will leave a link underneath so you can read the main thing, and then I want to look at her other article as well, which was quite good. So let's have a look. Now look, when it comes to Whitney Webb, I think she may have her own agenda. Like I've said before, she's not particularly, I wouldn't say she's pro nationalist or something. She probably comes from a sort of democratic kind of socialist background, but she's, you know, she's fairly impartial. But like with all these journalists, you know, we're not going to take like everything they say. Okay. So these, what I'm showing you there, which I'll just read out, are a series of tweets made by Whitney when this was in July 12, 2019. So bear in mind, Trump is still in office at the time she's writing this. So things have kind of moved on a little bit from then. And maybe the sting has been taken a little bit out of this article because of that. She gives a rather good summary in terms of these tweets. Now, I just copied and pasted them from Twitter. So they don't look very interesting because it's not all Twitty-fied. So she talks about her series on the threats to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and religious extremism kind of really warming up. Particularly, she's talking about, you know, mainly in Chabad Lubavitch zone of Judaism, because that is where Jared Kushner's from, and the Chabad Lubavitch is particularly interested in the orthodoxy and on this whole end times and Al-Aqsa Mosque thing, as are Christians, not particularly Catholics. It seems to be more of a evangelical or Puritan Protestant thing that's going on in America in terms of the support for this. So she says she's going to talk about how Christian Zionists, Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, many more, and the American elite were trying to use Jews as pawns of prophecy well before Herzl, and are still doing so today, especially under Trump, she says. Then she talks about the story of Christian Zionism's rise to power in the United States. Now, I would connect that specifically to both the Rockefellers and to the Russell branch of the Illuminati. Now, Russell branch of the Illuminati developed the Jehovah's Witnesses, but they were also key in the oh gosh, what's this called? The thing at Yale. What's it? Skull and Bones. They were key in Skull and Bones. So the Russell branch were also key in pushing the agenda behind Christian Zionism, and maybe gearing the kind of Christians in America to accept end times prophecy, to accept Israel's claim to that land, and to accept Jews as the chosen people. And it seems that also Russell was behind the rapture theory and the kind of pepping up of Revelations in terms of an important book of the Bible and putting an interpretation on that. So as I said, the Rockefellers were also very keenly involved in the church, and they also may have played a role in steering Christianity in the Zionist direction. So she talks about that. So she says here, the article's long. Yeah, no kidding, Whitney, your article's very long, right? So she says here, UK noblemen, these were particularly Protestants and Puritans, and even members of the UK royal family were the first to push for Jewish immigration to Palestine as a means of fulfilling prophecy, and was big among Puritans. Now, I believe that Elizabeth I and her counsellor John Dee. If I call him Jack Dee, just forgive me, because Jack Dee's like a comedian from the 90s, but in the UK. John Dee was a bit of a Rasputin character, a bit of a mystic astrologer, master of the occult arts. He was very close to Elizabeth I. They've always had these people knocking around them. You know, I bet Aleister Crowley was knocking around the royals as well. So it was John Dee that encouraged Elizabeth I to forge a kind of alliance with the Jewish community of London, and I think that is what strongly became the Council of 300, because we can't get away from the fact that, yes, while the Pope's a member of the Council of 300, it's got a very strong Jewish kind of Protestant Puritan flavour going on there. So to carry on with Whitney, so she says, after English-Irish preacher J.N. Darby created rapture theology and dispensal nationalism figures like Charles Taze Russell, there you go, Russell, from the Russell Illuminati, the founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses, they tried to convince American Jews and lobbied the Rothschilds to buy Palestine years before Herzl founded Zionism. Then she goes back to say that in 1891, which was 5 years before Herzl published The Jewish State, someone called W.E. Blackstone. Note the name Blackstone. Remember when we looked at all the companies and everything that Blackstone and BlackRock own? Well, Blackstone, I think the key person there is Schwartzman, who's also a member of Skull and Bones. Yep. So W.E. Blackstone, this must be the original Blackstone. Maybe that's where we get the name of that company. He delivered a petition to the US president, and its signatories included J.D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, of course, of the bank now, and the mayors of New York, Boston, Chicago, etc., as well as the SCOTUS, Supreme Court Justice of the time, and future President William McKinley. I think he was assassinated, William McKinley, wasn't he? Okay, so there you go. So this petition, signed by the most powerful Americans before Zionism even officially existed, asked the president to influence the European governments and to do everything possible to give the land of Palestine to European Jews. Blackstone felt that had to be done before the second coming could occur. So here are all these influential people hedging their bets to the second coming. Is that what it's really about? Was it the cover story? I think it's a cover story. I think there's something much more important about that particular part of land. But there seems a great keenness to get that land under control, and a keenness to get Christians buying into this as well. And I think a lot of Jewish people weren't really buying into it, right? Not all Jewish people perhaps cared, but they wanted to get Christians and Jews to buy into this land of Israel taking over Palestine, blah, blah, blah. It sounds to me as a building up of the Crusades, a la the Knights Templar. Yeah, well, that's what it feels like. Okay, so skipping ahead, she said she talks about how the Schofield Reference Bible was funded by an American elite men's club, an influential associate of Louis Brandeis, like Untermeyer. Okay. Brandeis would later use W.E. Blackstone in his Zionist lobbying efforts. Okay, so this goes to now, what I'm going to be quoting from is the article by Whitney Webb. And so she talks about the ancient site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which dates back to the year 705. Now, we know that after 705, as talked about, they had various mosques there which were destroyed by earthquake or whatever. Significant one was, I think, around about 780, we had the chart for there, that was built. So she's saying it's been targeted for destruction by extremist groups that want to erase Jerusalem's Muslim heritage in pursuit of colonial ambitions and the fulfillment of end times prophecy. Now, I don't, in this article, want to get into any of the conflicts in the area. We just got to talk about it in relation to end times prophecy. So it's located on the Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif, and it's the third holiest site in Islam, recognized throughout the world as a symbol of Jerusalem. So a lot of people have noticed that the Israeli government and religious officials are removing the Dome of the Rock from the Jerusalem skyline in terms of pictures, postcards, etc. They almost want to erase it from official posters, banners, educational material, etc. Now there's a Knesset member of the ruling Likud party, Yehuda Glick, who is an American born. He was the director of the government-funded Temple Institute, which was created detailing the architectural plans for a temple that they hope will soon replace the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And this Glick is apparently close mates with Yehuda Etzion, who was part of the failed plot in 1984 to blow up the mosque and serve prison time as a result. So it's been a long-standing thing that people have been gunning for that mosque. I mean, it's just so much importance to these elites of that area. It's intriguing. So Israel's agricultural minister Uri Ariel said that, but we need to build a real temple on the Temple Mount. And he said that the new Jewish temple must be built on the site where Al-Aqsa currently sits, because it's the forefront of what he says is Jewish salvation. And since then, we've had prominent Israeli politicians getting more and more overt in their support of this. And the end of the Jordanian Palestinian sovereignty over the mosque compound. And many prominent Palestinians have been warning for years that they want to destroy this mosque. So it says in recent years, this kind of centuries-old effort, and we know it's centuries-old because it goes back to the Knights Templar and the Crusades and all that, but what was once quite a small group of extremists who were buying into this whole idea has gone really mainstream in Israel, and there are a lot of prominent politicians, religious figures, political parties, all advocating for the destruction of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque to fulfill prophecy. It's a specific interpretation of end times. It used to be considered fringe, but like they say, it's getting a lot more mainstream. There's also a guy called Miko Peled. He's an Israeli author, human rights activist, and he's told Mint Press, for which Whitney writes, that this movement to replace the Al-Aqsa Mosque with a temple became notable after the 1967 war, and it's since become a massive colonial project, and it's using religious and biblical mythology and symbols to justify it, and it's getting more and more support. Now, they were saying that at the time of this article, which is July 2019, it was really picking up in pace, particularly because the revelation of the so-called deal of the century, which was the push for a war with Iran and Lebanon's Hezbollah, and the Trump administration's dramatic lenience in regards to the activity of Jewish extremist groups and extremist settlements in Israel. Now, this article mentions that when Trump was in power, this whole thing seemed more likely to happen, and he seemed to be egging it on. And particularly, I feel this could be connected to Jared Kushner, because Jared Kushner seems to fit in the mode of people who find this whole thing very believable and significant. So they say these factors, the Trump administration, correlate with a quickening of efforts to destroy Al-Aqsa and the very real danger that the centuries-old holy site faces. Okay, the US press occasionally mentions the role of religious extremism in dictating the foreign policy of the US politicians, but Mike Pompeo has really, and that's what Mike Pompeo, they talk about religious extremists, but they really shine a light on the role of Jewish extremism in directing Israel's foreign policy, which in turn influences American politics. I mean, we know that Israel runs a lot of American foreign policy. It's just the thing. So the threats to Al-Aqsa Mosque are clearly revealed to be much greater than just the loss of a physical building and the site's destruction. It will cause a regional conflagration, perhaps even a global war with clear religious dimensions. Is this the big Armageddon that they're trying to set off by causing a war of civilizations, by going for that holy site and inflaming tensions to a point where they can bring about such massive destruction that they bring in their new world order? This is kind of the things they go for. So she says it's essential to highlight the role that extremist apocalyptic interpretations of both the Jewish and Christian faiths are playing in trends, in that if left unchecked, well, who knows? Okay, so again, she's talking about the growth of extremist movements, policy, okay, Donald Trump, Hezbollah, okay, we've got all that. She talks about someone called Rabbi Zvi Hirsch Kalisha, and he expounded an early form of what would be later renamed religious Zionism. He was particularly interested in the acquisition of Haram al-Sharif, the Temple Mount, in order to, again, fulfill prophecy. There was apparently some essay called Proto-Zionism and its Proto-Herzl, the philosophy and efforts of Rabbi Zvi Hirsch Kalisha, by Sam Lehman Vilzig, who was professor of Israeli politics and Judaic studies at Bar-Ilan University in Israel, and Kalisha was seeking to court wealthy European Jews to finance the purchase of the Palestinian land before Israel was actually settled as it is now, particularly the Temple Mount. And in 1836, he wrote a letter to Baron Amschler Rothschild. He was the big dude of the Rothschilds, the original grandfather of the Rothschilds, and he suggested that the eldest brother of the wealthy banker family use his abundant funds to bring the Jewish sovereignty to Palestine, specifically Jerusalem and Temple Mount. Now, then the land of Israel was under the dominion of Pasha, and okay, I'm just going to see what. Oh yes, he said, if this was in the letter to the Rothschilds, if His Most Noble Excellency pays him a handsome sum and purchases for him some other country in Africa in exchange for the Holy Land, which is presently in small quantity but in great quality, this money would certainly not be wasted. For when the leaders of Israel are gathered from every corner of the world, and they will transform it into an inhabited country, the many God-fearing and charitable Jews will travel there and take up their residency in the Holy Land under Jewish sovereignty, and be worthy to take up their portion in the offering to the altar. And if the master, Ibrahim Pasha, does not desire to sell the entire land, then at least he should sell Jerusalem and its environs, or at least the Temple Mount and surrounding area. So there's the big push again, as it was with the Crusaders. So apparently he didn't get much of response from Baron Rothschild, and so he pursued other wealthy Jewish families like the Montefiores with the same goal in mind. So he was initially unsuccessful in getting the support of the Rothschilds, but he later got enthusiastic support in the decades that followed from various families interested in Zionism. Okay, Kalisha was also influential in that he was the first modern rabbi to reject the idea of patiently waiting for God to fulfill prophecy. Now, he came up with this idea that you kind of egg it on, right? He proposed that man should take concrete steps that will lead to the fulfillment of such prophecies. He described that as self-help. Interesting idea. He says settling European Jews in Palestine was the first step, to be followed by other steps that would form an active as opposed to a passive response to Jewish messianism. So the subsequent steps included the transition to a third temple, which will replace the second temple, which was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE, and the reinitiation of animal ritual sacrifices in that temple. So he was advocating for animal ritual sacrifices as part of all this. Interesting. So there was also another Rabbi, Judah Al-Khalai, who was a contemporary of Kalisha, also agreed with this, and he said it's obvious that the Messiah ben David, the Messiah of the house of David, will not appear out of thin air in a fiery chariot with fiery horses, but will only come if the children of Israel bend to the task of preparing it for themselves, or preparing themselves for him. There's an Orthodox Jewish group based in New York that opposes Zionism, and they told Mint Press and Whitney Webb that many religious Zionists have since latched on to these ideas, which were once widely rejected, and now they're justifying kind of neo-colonial actions in that area. So those beliefs obviously have become more popular for whatever reason. So the debate within Judaism of the Temple Mount certainly has changed dramatically since the 19th century, and it's become a lot more significant. In Islam, it's very important because it's considered to be the place where Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. It's mentioned in the Quran, and it glorifies the mosque and identifies it as a blessed mosque. So it's really, it's a tense issue, this. All Muslims, Sunni and Shia, revere that mosque. And that fact hasn't remained challenged, so... Okay, so this push, the modern day push towards gaining control of that land, dates back to the Six-Day War. And after the heartland of biblical Israel came under Israeli control, religious Zionism, who before were kind of marginalized, sought their mission now to settle the newly conquered lands and to be the new pioneers. And they kind of took on these Zionist ideologies in settling Palestine and ridding all the Arab population, etc., etc. So look, I know there's an argument there, and people get upset both sides as who's settling, who's doing what, who's right and who's wrong. As I say, I'm not really interested in that for this article. It's just the link it has to Revelations, to the apocalypse, and to people buying into this. So she goes on quite a lot here about how it's just become a lot more mainstream. Okay. You know, we have a guy here saying that he just thought the whole thing was a scare tactic aimed at securing the indefinite nature of occupation, and said that many Israelis didn't really want a spike or a renewal of conflict, and that would inevitably result if the mosque was to be destroyed. So obviously a lot of sensible people realize that they don't want this and they don't want to bring this on. Okay. Okay, during the 1967 war, there was this guy, General Shlomo Goren, chief rabbi of the IDF, and he told the chief of Central Command shortly after the conquest of Jerusalem's old city that the moment had come to blow up the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, and he said, do this and you will go down in history. So, as you can see there, it's hotting up during the 1967 war, which, as they say, is the second key element. Okay, let's move on. You know, Whitney Webb does go into a lot of detail, and you have to read out what's interesting. I'll mention here there was a 1996 massacre at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So you can see it's been such a contentious issue. Remember I was saying about the tunnels? Well, a lot of Israeli archaeologists have argued that the tunnels are not built for any archaeological or scientific purposes, and they're very unlikely to result in new discoveries. And they think that these excavations are not yielding anything scientific. It's marginal, and they are probably more likely to destabilize the building. Okay, yes. So she goes on to say that drums have been beating more loudly recently, even though there's been a long-standing effort to destroy this historic mosque and the Dome of the Rock. Recent weeks, which we're going back now to June 2019, have seen a disturbing and dramatic uptick in incidents which suggest that the influential groups in Israel that have long pushed for the mosque's destruction may soon get their way. So in April 1991, Figlin, well, you'll have to read the article to find who the heck he is, won't you? Called for the immediate construction of the third temple, telling a Tel Aviv conference, I don't want to build a third temple in 1 or 2 years, I want to build it now. The Times of Israel reported his comments, noting that the Israeli politician is enjoying growing popularity. Very interestingly, the same day there was that fire at Notre Dame, a mysterious fire broke out at the Al-Aqsa. So funny that that should be the same day, but of course the news of Notre Dame totally eclipsed it, didn't it? So we go on, there's been all these recent provocations, and they come soon after King of Jordan Abdullah II publicly stated in March of 2019 that he had recently come under great pressure to relinquish Jordan's custodianship of the mosque and the contested holy site upon which it is built. And then obviously they give some more detail there. I don't think I should read all this because none of it is particularly, I mean, you're getting the gist, aren't you? So she goes on to finalize it by saying, as subsequent installments of the series will show, this movement has gained powerful allies, not just in Israeli government, but among many evangelical Christians in the United States, including top figures in the Trump administration, who also feel that the destruction of the Al-Aqsa and the reconstruction of a Jewish temple are prerequisites for the fulfillment of prophecy, albeit a different one. Furthermore, given the influence of such movements on the Israeli and US governments, these beliefs of active messianism are informing key policies of these same governments, and in doing so are pushing the world towards a dangerous war. So will we see, I'm wondering if they're going to try and provoke Iran until Iran does a strike on that mosque, which destroys it and fulfills biblical prophecy for all these elements of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam who want to see the apocalypse happen, and who have bought in to the manipulation of revelations, to the adding of the rapture by possibly the Rockefellers and the Russell Foundation, in order to make people think that this is inevitable and that the happening should be heralded as a good thing. You know, we wonder, when we look back in astrology, we see that this was a time of great conflict in that area. It was the time when the Knights Templar were so hell-bent on rebuilding the temple. And now, later, when we have the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction going into air, we again have a lot of these same movers and shakers who probably are somewhat related to those ones way back when, through their lineage or through ancient Babylonian mystery schools, which they really subscribe to, rather than religion, because I don't think it is religion at the key to this. It's the Babylonian cult that it's the key to this in all three of the religions, except that we've been made to see them all as something different. But I think they're always working towards that end. My question, and I've wondered this for years, not decades, what is so bleeding significant about Jerusalem, Israel, that bit of land under the Al-Aqsa Mosque? You know, what's there? Why is there such a fascination and obsession with having control over that area? What's buried under there? Is it some sort of amazing secret that would unlock all the mysteries of our past as a human race, right? Maybe, who knows? But I'm interested now. Well, Trump's not in office, and we know that there was a huge push to get him out of office to the extent of committing electoral fraud. But we know there are also all these little, particularly in Maricopa County in Arizona and across America, there are pushes now for more and more audits which will uncover the electoral fraud. And then people will begin to realize that there is an illegitimate president. But what does that actually mean? Will we see the return of Trump? He says he's going to start doing rallies soon. You know, if he announces his candidacy for the Republican candidate, no one else is going to stand. He's going to walk the candidacy. Will he walk the election? Well, if it comes out that there was massive fraud, that could undermine trust in the Democratic Party, depending on how everything else goes with the whole health crisis going on and the economy, the collapse of the dollar potentially, maybe people will look to him as some sort of savior. And then in some people's eyes, this prophecy can be fulfilled. He will be the last president. And like I said, the Trumpet magazine, which is the Christian evangelical magazine, seemed absolutely convinced that Trump had to be there for the end times prophecy to take place. I don't think we should be subscribing to revelations or end times as an inevitability. We should rather see it as the following of a script. So, you know, I hope you weren't bored at some aspects of the article, because it does get long-winded, and I'm not sure everything I'd saved there is as interesting as it appeared when I kind of summarized it. But there you go, guys. Just a little bit food for thought. I do want to revisit this slightly with some more interesting information that ties into the Illuminati families, but I've been itching to get going on this for a long time, so glad I finally got there.